Hello and welcome to this, the fifth of my daily thoughts as we prepare for Easter Sunday. Today is Maundy Thursday, which traditionally is the night of the Last Supper, where Jesus shares the bread and the wine with his disciples in the upper room prior to his arrest, and then the following day his crucifixion. Or if you're reading John's Gospel, it's the event at which Jesus washes the disciples' feet and says that's what they're to do to each other and to the world. So both of those very interesting, but actually I want to concentrate on the story that comes just before that in Mark's Gospel. So let me share my screen. And show you that it's Mark's Gospel, chapter 14, verses 3 to 9, which is the story of Jesus being anointed at Bethany. Now, this is something that's bothered me for a while. It says, while he was at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper. Now, lepers would not live in houses. They would not own houses. They would have to move out of their house when they get leprosy and go and live outside of the city. That's why Jesus spent so much time with lepers, because they were really on the margins. Also, if you read John's Gospel and his version of this story, this Simon is actually the father of Lazarus, Mary, and Martha. And on the investigation, I discover there is now some query as to the word leper is the right translation for the word in the original language that the Gospels were written in, and that it's actually Simon the jar maker. The word for leper, with the addition of one more letter, becomes the word for jar maker. And in this story, the woman, who turns out to be Mary in John's version, but the woman breaks an alabaster flask. So maybe her dad made it, Simon the jar maker. Makes a lot of sense. Or it could be Simon the leper is actually Simon the ex-leper. That he was a leper, Jesus healed him, and now he's living in a house. I don't know, but it doesn't quite read right, Simon the leper. So maybe it's Simon the jar maker. Have a look at that. Do a bit of searching around and see what you come up with. But anyway, he, in this house, he's reclining. Jesus is reclining for a meal, as was the tradition. That's, he didn't sit around a table. And a woman came holding an alabaster flask of very costly perfumed oil of genuine nard, which would have been very expensive. And after breaking the flask, she poured it on his head. Now, the disciples get very uptight about this, and a number of them say, isn't this a total waste of money, spending all this money on this nard when the money could have been given to the poor? Jesus explains that this woman understands what's happening to Jesus. He sort of hints at, really, in that he's about to be killed and he'll be buried, and this is the preparation for his burial. He says this down in verse 8 of the chapter. She did what she could. She poured perfume on my body beforehand to prepare for my burial. And it was a worship of Jesus, preparing for his burial, but a worship of Jesus that says to us, actually, if from our hearts we are worshiping Jesus, we are loving God, then the cost doesn't matter. Now, to these disciples who are querying this, Jesus says this to them, and here's a phrase that I've heard misused over the years a million times, and I'm potentially not exaggerating. They say this money could have, given to the poor, and he says, the poor you will always have with you, and you can help them at any time. And I've heard people argue when I was working in world development that it's a waste of time giving money to the poor because it won't help them, because the poor will always be with us in this world. There will always be poor people. Well, the fact is, yeah, there probably will always be poor people because the world is sinful. But as Christians, we're seeking to do what we can to help the poor liberate themselves from poverty. But the phrase, the poor will be always with you, could be taken literally. There will always be poor people with you. As a Christian, you will always be where the poor are. Do you understand? The poor will always be with you. You will always be with the poor. And it's a challenge to us that are we really living the kingdom life when we're not living amongst the poor or working amongst the poor or spending our time in some way or other amongst the poor, because they are God's special people. He loves us all, but he has a special concern for the poor. We've dealt with that before. So really, let me just nail that phrase. The poor will always be with you because you will always be with the poor. You will always have the poor uppermost in your mind and in your heart. But it's this expression of worship that I want to focus on. The way in which this woman uses this expensive oil to worship Jesus and prepare him for his burial. Our worship to Jesus and our love of God should be extravagant. Extravagant, and not just in money terms, but in time and in personal expression of how much we love God and how much we love Jesus. During this period in the run-up to Easter, Jesus is challenged again about what is the greatest commandment. And so he answers it actually with two commandments from different places in the Old Testament. But the first one is love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, really with all your being. Love the Lord your God. And that is the first command to us, which is what this woman is doing. She is worshiping and loving God. And it's because we're believers in Jesus, we're lovers of God. That is our first command, to love God. Yeah? As believers, we express in whatever way we can towards God, towards Jesus, in the power of the Holy Spirit, our love for God. The second commandment, says Jesus, is this: love your neighbor as yourself. And loving your neighbor as yourself is why we are disciples of Jesus. We're believers in Jesus because we love God, because he loves us. We're disciples of Jesus because we want to express what Jesus was doing in the world to people in the world. Loving our neighbor. And our neighbor could be the person next door or someone way over the other side of the world in Afghanistan, or First Nation people in North America, or whoever throughout the world. They're all our neighbors. And so being a disciple of Jesus means wanting to be like Jesus to the people around the world in whatever way we can. But as we come up to the time where God sacrifices his own son, Jesus, on the cross, which we'll be thinking about tomorrow, this woman brings us the meaning of worshiping God with extravagance. The final thing to say just briefly is this is the first of a number of occasions during the Easter weekend where women carry the good news, where women are the example to us. So what women do, like this woman here, like the women at the cross, like the women at the empty tomb on Easter Sunday, show us all the way. And the way that God involves women in these key demonstrations of what it means to be a follower of Christ, I think is wonderful. And another underlining of the equality of the sexes and the importance of the role of women and men together equally in God's kingdom.